He finally did it. Everyone was asking for the letter from the chairman at the end of last year, and it feels clear now that he was waiting for something to happen because things are definitely happening. Now, before we get into the letter, I want to let you know that I'm not going through this line by line. I'm just going to cherry pick out the things that I feel are important for you guys and the things that I found important. I really do think that you guys should read this yourself because it's incredibly detailed and you might find something in there that's really valuable to you. But I will say this is the most raw CIG has been, and especially Chris Roberts has been, since pretty much I've ever seen them talk about Star Citizen, but not so much at the start. A lot of the discussion at the start was a very different tone than I've been hearing the last few years because they touted such ease with switching to work from home. But 2 years later, the effect it has had on Star Citizen's development has become very clear. And I quote, "When everyone is working remotely, it becomes more of a slog to problem solve on the fly or easily get or give feedback. And you end up with far more meetings and video calls. I personally felt the difference in our release cadence. It took us a little longer to get each patch out than before, and it became harder to solve or fix bugs, which hung around longer than previously." Regardless of the challenges that CIG has been facing over the last couple of years, the player counts continue to rise, and they are up big this year. And Chris writes, "So far we have blown past all our projections on new players joining the verse. In fact, this year we have more than doubled our rate of new user acquisition. We're enjoying monthly active users, which is well beyond the highs of 2020. And we have nearly 1 million new accounts created since then, and more than 500,000 new pledging players join the game." This is a phenomenon at this point. The game, while lacking so many of the core systems to even call it a game, is providing experiences that you just don't get anywhere else. And I think this is what's starting to draw players in and keep them here. And this just impacts more than consumer confidence. Chris starts out here with discussing the horrid wait from 2.6 to 3.0, but comparing the change that this foundational tech will make to the game to procedural planets and the way that they changed the game in 2017. One key takeaway from the letter is Cloud Imperium is sharing what went wrong with iCache, which was the system persistence was hinging on. The development has not been without road bumps. We had to change our plans for how we would persist the state of the universe when we realized that the back-end relational database we were planning on using with a host of services, which had collectively been dubbed iCache, would likely not be able to have the low latency at scale we needed for the number of concurrent players we will need to support in the future. And this is why we're still in 2022 with zero progress made on one of the most foundational systems Star Citizen has with persistence and server meshing in terms of the expectations they created of where it was supposed to release years earlier. It's because they had to completely change that foundational system altogether. I don't know why this wasn't made clearer earlier. On a much lighter note, the system they changed to, persistent entity streaming, hit a major milestone last week and was working on an internal demo for the studio to see. This is an incredibly important step to see if Star Citizen will live up to the expectations it's created for itself, with a little help from us as well. PES is the bulk of the work needed to bring what we as backers understand as the most important tech to realize the Star Citizen we backed for, server meshing. And Chris shared that it is, as of right now, 3/4 of the workload. To support PES, we needed to create 12 new services. For server meshing, only 4 more services are currently planned, so you can see just how much foundational tech for server meshing is in persistent entity streaming. Now, this feels like he's only referring to static server meshing, but regardless, it's been an incredibly long road, and I can finally feel like we're seeing the next crossroads. I don't think we're seeing the end of the road, but that next crossroad of where we go next. The last 6 to 9 months of Star Citizen has been way more stable than the game has been for some time. Probably ever. This is not possible to continue to maintain if you're adding features like PES, which literally touch everything in the game. And because Star Citizen isn't your traditional alpha, they're handling the rest of the year a bit different. Because of this, we're going to be approaching 3.8 differently than our previous releases. Our guess is that it may be as long as 3 months in the PTU stage, but it is hard to predict. And I really feel this is the way to do things. Remember how many players are playing Star Citizen, right? Well, that's all gone if you throw in these new features and don't give them time to stabilize in 3.18. And piggybacking off of the success of 3.15 into 3.16, we will not be getting 3.18 as our next patch. So we're planning to release a content-rich Alpha 3.17.2 patch with known stable code, new missions, new locations, and other gameplay in late June. And this exact way of patching is likely what led to the explosion of players this year, and there's no reason to undo that at all. Then once 3.18 is stabilized, we'll likely see it released later in Q3, but everything we spoke about up to this point is leading into one item, and that is server meshing and its timeline for release. Our current goal is to introduce server meshing End 4.0 as an early technical preview to Evocati testers in the PTU at the end of Q4 this year. But this is heavily conditioned on how well/easy the persistent entity streaming rollout goes. So be warned, this has a high chance of slipping into Q1 next year. Now, I've heard this by the end of the year, maybe Q1 next year for 3 straight years now, but I have not heard it in the context of a letter like this. This feels more possible and realistic of a timeline, but when it comes to this in particular, server meshing and the by the end of the year statements, I won't be holding my breath, but I'll believe it when I see it, and I'm hopeful that we will. The team is heavily investing in larger spaces to grow. They are simply running out of space in many of their current locations, but the new Manchester studio is something else. This is entirely too over the top to me, and I'm sorry, but it is simply not how I want to see the game funded entirely by the player base to use that money. The Frankfurt studio is a much more appropriate design in my opinion, but if this is anything like the LA office door, it's probably not as expensive as it looks, but it just feels unnecessary. The last thing I want to touch on is CitizenCon 2022. It will not be in person, but not only that, they will not have a keynote this year like they've had in every year previously. I assume that many of you think I'm going to get upset about this, but this is something I've been begging for literal years. They dropped the Gamescom demo because it put too much stress on the development. How would CitizenCon demos be any different? Because it builds a strong community and helps with funding, but once the game is a product people are drawn to, you don't need to do these things as much. For me, the key takeaway from this letter is that more players are playing Star Citizen than ever before, and that's forcing CIG to develop the game less like an alpha and more like a live service. To not do a keynote like they've done in every year past tells us just how important these next few months are. And they're going to be rough. They're going to be bumpy, but there's nobody I want to take that ride with more than the guys in my community, you guys. Thank you so much for being awesome. I really hope you guys enjoyed this video. Make sure you leave a like, comment, subscribe, all those things, and thanks for watching.